Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Zoo School Live. And today I figured we'd stay outside since it's so beautiful out. And we're going to take a little time to explore some of the gardens that we have outside of our Discovery Center. In particular, we're going to look at our sensory garden and our butterfly nursery, or our butterfly pollinator garden we're in the process of creating. So my hope is that we'll get a chance to learn a little bit about more of these flowers you're seeing starting to bloom, their importance, and how you can actually create these spaces nearby you. So to start off, we'll take a quick look. I have some examples of different flowers we have around here today. Now, flowers come in all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are going to have multiple petals. Some of those petals might be bunched or whorled around a center. This one here is our magnolia tree, our dogwood tree, very beautiful. We have some foam flower that actually just looks like a little bit of foam on the tip, which is really beautiful. Our cherry tree, and then our creeping phlox. So all of these flowers have been blooming this time of year, and they serve a purpose. You know, obviously we love flowers in the springtime, but they are very important for nature and for many different animals as well. So they're not just here for our enjoyment. A lot of times they are going to provide food and shelter for different types of insects and small animals. And then of course for the plant itself, those flowers are how they reproduce. Flowers are used to produce fruits and nuts and things like that, the seeds to sow the next generation of a plant. So they're not just all for show, but we certainly do like looking at them here at Elmwood Park Zoo, and I'm sure you guys do at home as well. So we're gonna start off by touring our sensory garden today. And not everything is in bloom yet. It is still pretty early. It only recently has been warm enough for many of our plants to start to sprout. But we'll just take a quick glance. We'll walk down along here. This sensory garden was helped to be installed actually by Eisenhower School, which is across the street from the zoo. So we actually had a group of students come out 2 years ago to help us plant this. And you'll notice that we are using tires as the bed. These were actually donated by a local landscaping company. Normally they would have been thrown out, kind of wasted, and so we decided to use them instead to create a little bit of a recycled and upcycled aesthetic. So this sensory garden, as the name suggests, is been designed to encourage people to use all different types of senses. So we'll go along and I'll point out some of the specific plants, but the general idea is that we were hoping to have people look at different shapes, different colors, feel different textures, to smell different scents. So we want someone to engage all or as many of their senses as possible when they are exploring. Now we also wanted to kind of put a mixture of plants that are native or naturally found here in Pennsylvania, along with some herbs and some non-natives. And the reason we chose to do this is because native plants in general are a little bit easier to maintain, and they often provide really great habitat for those pollinators and for the animals that share our space. So let's take a look as we go. We'll start over here with some of these plants. Now they are not really blooming yet. They kind of look a little unimpressive right now, but I'm actually super excited about them because this is our little milkweed area. So the plants that are really popping up right here, these guys are actually butterfly milkweed. And then behind them, these tiny little friends that are popping up, that is swamp milkweed. So we'll take a look in a little bit when we head to our butterfly garden what those plants look like when they are blooming. But this time of year, the milkweed is just starting to pop out. And so this whole tire is dedicated to the milkweed species that will feed a very important butterfly that many of you are probably familiar with, the monarch butterfly. So those guys are just starting to sprout. This is kind of more of our scent sensory area. So we have some mint growing here. So if you were to break off a leaf and smell it, it would smell very delicious. Think of your mint gums and candies. And we've tried to pick herbs that are pretty hardy so that they can be touched and they can be broken off and not suffer too much. We also have some rosemary. Now this guy's looking a little haggard right now. He's coming back, I promise. They do overwinter. And so we tried to pick herbs that would do well in our climate and come back year to year if possible. So our rosemary's hanging in there. He's just had a rough winter. He's got to take a little time to spruce up for spring. This is actually fennel, which can be both a nice smell and a nice texture. So you can see that very feathery look to the stem and the leaves. So with some of these plants, we're trying to get a little bit of both, right? Now the beautiful purple flowers, you'll see we have them all over the place. Those are called creeping phlox, and we actually tried to add them in as fillers because they provide a really beautiful flower during a lot of the early parts of spring, and they help to cover the ground, which helps prevent water loss in the hotter months of the season. So they are just kind of a nice little beautiful addition. This guy here is then dill. So we have dill and fennel. Dill is going to have that more pungent smell, think of pickles, but again, nice texture, very strong scent. We also had some parsley that was growing in here, but it looks like that friend didn't quite make it for the winter, so we'll have to replant. This one is also a mixed native garden, so it's not blooming quite yet, but what we have here is something called mountain mint, and I actually do have a picture to share with you guys here so we can get an idea of what mountain mint looks like. So this is going to be our mountain mint flower, and we'll try to show that in the, there we go. So mountain mint is not very showy, in fact kind of unassuming, but it is actually one of the most important plants that you can put in your garden if you're trying to attract all different types of pollinators. This one was actually studied by Penn State, and they found that it had the highest diversity of pollinators on it when planted. So mountain mint doesn't produce the most colorful flower, but it is beautiful, and it of course has a nice smell. And then in the back here, this guy, again, not blooming quite yet, they're more of a late summer bloomer. This is going to be our purple coneflower, which some of you are probably very familiar with, also called echinacea, depending on where you are. So purple coneflower is a nice, beautiful flower that comes out in the summer. That will be blooming hopefully soon. And these actually, as I said, this garden is about 2 years old, so they are all coming back after their initial planting, which is really exciting. Now moving along, we have a few more colors and textures. Now this one is called Lantana. I just planted this one today. Again, not very exciting at the moment, but it is going to have a really beautiful pink and yellow flower. Now Lantana is not native. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. If you've ever gone to a garden center or a nursery, you've probably seen it. It is very showy, and it's great to grow in your garden, especially if you get a lot of sunshine. And it is an awesome pollinator plant. Again, Penn State did some studies. This is probably one of the best annuals you could plant in your garden. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind when you are buying flowers or plants to grow is where you're getting them from. All of our native plants that you're looking at today are actually from Bowman's Hill Preserve, which is found here in Pennsylvania. It's over by New Hope, and they grow native plants and sell them in their nursery. And they do that without using a lot of the harsh chemicals and pesticides some places might use. And then the non-natives, the annuals that we're looking at, the Lantana, and we'll see a few more up here, are actually from local nurseries in the area that we can ask about their practices and try to make sure it's safe, or at least as safe as possible for the environment. This one's actually one of my favorite. This is called lamb's ear, and I wish you guys could reach through your screen and touch it because it is incredibly soft. And its name is pretty telling. It's called lamb's ear because it feels like you're touching a little lamb's ear. So this one's a really great texture one. This actually used to live with some other plants, but as you can see, it's very prolific. It has decided to take over, so it is going to have its own garden space this year. Now, moving on, we have another one who's just getting ready to start to produce blooms. So you can actually see the little flower buds starting there. This is called Coriopsis, and I have a photo you guys can look at for this one. Coriopsis can be, there are a lot of different varieties, but in general, you're usually going to have a flower that looks a little bit like this. So a nice bright yellow bloom. Sometimes it has a more yellow center, but this Coriopsis version is going to look like that. And this is another semi-native. There are many different types, but in general, certain species of Coriopsis are native to Pennsylvania, and they do attract a lot of pollinators. Another big one that some of you may be familiar with that has a really awesome scent is going to be this guy right here. So this one, depending on where you are and who you are, you might pronounce the name a little differently. I call it Bergamo. Some people call it bergamot or bergamot. However you pronounce it, it is in the bee balm family. And so it's going to produce a flower that looks a little bit like this. Really beautiful purple showy flowers, and it has a very interesting smell. The other really cool thing is that it is in the mint family, and we know this because mint family plants have actually a square stem. Now it's probably really hard to see, but it does in fact have a square stem. So this fits in our sensory category of not only beautiful colors and weird shapes, but also different textures and smells. And it's a really nice one for insects as well. So that's our Bergamo, bergamot, bee balm. We have a few petunias. These are pretty obvious. Many people have seen these, especially this time of year. I got two varieties that have some really cool colors. These came from a local nursery called Greenleaf, and they actually are able to source many of their flowers from the area. So again, you know, you don't always have to buy native plants. You can buy things that aren't necessarily from around here as long as you do it responsibly. And these actually do attract certain species of bees and butterflies. And then wrapping up our garden over here, we have one of my absolute favorite spring flowers. Now this is a species of a group of flowers that can be found in the wild here in Pennsylvania. Now this is not a wild variety, this is a cultivated variety, but it's still the same species. It is called columbine, and in the wild they're typically bright blood red. But they have the most interesting shaped flower. It's almost like an upside down bell. You can see it's got multiple layers and these really beautiful leaves that are lobed. So columbine is a type of flower that we call a spring ephemeral. And spring ephemerals are usually plants that are going to produce blooms early in the spring before most of the leaf cover has come out. And that's a really great survival strategy because once the leaves in the forest have kind of taken over, it's going to be harder for them to get a lot of sunlight, right? So they actually bloom very quickly, produce their flower, produce their seed, and then they die off for the rest of the season. Now the whole plant won't die off, but all these flowers will be gone probably in the next week or so. So this is absolutely one of my favorite flowers to have in the garden. It can do well in both shade and in sun. So this spot out here gets a lot of sun during the day for about half the day. We have more of our creeping phlox and a few other little filler plants here. This one's really cool. This one actually has a nice texture. It's got a thick, almost succulent-like leaf. So this is going to be another texture plant that we have growing along with our creeping phlox. So these guys just kind of provide a little bit of that extra. Now there is a tire, believe it or not, underneath all of this creeping phlox. So again, why it's a really good filler plant. So all of these plants, like I said, come together to make our sensory garden. Many of them are native, but you don't have to stick with just native plants. Pollinators and other animals are going to benefit in a lot of different ways from any kind of natural cover. The best thing you can try to do, if you have space, is provide a variety of things. And, you know, a lot of the push nowadays is to move away from lawns and just these barren, basically wild wastelands. Lawns and things like that where they're just bare beds of mulch really don't provide a lot of resources, food, or shelter for different insects and animals. So even if you have a small space and all you can really do is plant 1 or 2 beds, that's still going to help those animals out. So we're going to walk over to our other garden section. We'll walk underneath our beautiful blooming trees so you guys can kind of see that. And we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing for our butterfly specific garden. So you guys can follow me. We'll enjoy our cherry tree here. It is still in full bloom. Okay, so it's a little bit of a mess over here, and that's because I was hard at work earlier today trying to prep for zoo school. So we'll take a look over here. This is a tiny, tiny little space. So again, even if you don't have a full yard that you can plant up, this is all you need. You don't even need this much. You could do flower pots. But if we take a look, we've got a couple different plants that are starting to sprout, and we have a few that are going to go in very soon. You'll also see this giant pile of weeds. Now, I am not one that is super against weeds, but this particular type of weed is what we call an invasive species. So it is often going to take over and kind of push out your local species. So not every plant that's not from around here is bad, but this one, which is called celandine, is very common this time of year and completely covers the ground. So all of this came out of there, and it was crowding out my little friends. So I did remove as much as possible. So we'll take a look at what we've got sprouting. I did plant a few plants last year. If we look right here and right here, we have what's called butterfly weed. And I have a nice picture to show you what they look like blooming. So butterfly weed is extremely showy, brilliant, beautiful orange flowers. So butterfly weed is actually a species of milkweed, and it is one that is found around here naturally. So this one has a beautiful orange flower. These tiny little guys, they're a little bit more hidden in the back. There's one here and then one on the other side. Those are actually called whorled milkweed. And whorled milkweed, as the name suggests, has kind of flowers in a whorled shape around the stem. And they have this more kind of long, stringy leaf. You can kind of start to see that on this guy here, that long, stringy leaf. Another species of native milkweed. Now, ready to be planted, we have a couple other friends. This one is actually swamp milkweed. I mentioned that earlier in our butterfly garden tire area. Swamp milkweed can get to be really tall, around 4 to 6 feet tall, and they have this beautiful pink flower. Now, as the name suggests, swamp milkweed is often found in a swampy, more wet area, but it can do well in a meadow or more dry spot too. It's pretty adaptable. And then this one here is actually called our Showy Golden Rod. And Showy Golden Rod, as the name suggests, has a beautiful golden color. So this is actually what that will grow into. Pretty small plant, but it can grow into 2, 3, 4 feet tall. Now, goldenrod gets a bad reputation because many times people feel as though it's going to give them allergies. It is not the same thing as ragweed. It is not the plant that causes your sneezing and your itching and your miserable time in the fall. But it is an incredibly important late season pollinator plant. So that's why I chose some goldenrod, because that will provide food for the adults, the monarch butterfly adults, later on in their migration season, whereas the milkweeds are going to provide food for the caterpillars. So if you're trying to plant a garden for your pollinators, you want to include both host plants like the milkweed here and plants that have nectar for the adults. And then last but not least, over here, I have a friend who is not super showy, but is just as important. So this one is called boneset. And boneset is a very kind of normal, non-exciting white flower, but again, grows pretty tall, and it is probably one of the best native pollinator plants. Again, Penn State did some studies. Boneset was another one that had a very high diversity of different insects, not just butterflies, but different types of flies and bees and other things would visit boneset. So it's a really important pollinator plant. Again, adding it to our butterfly garden to try to attract a variety of things and provide food for those adults. So we can look at any questions you guys might have. As usual, if you have something you'd like to ask related to our garden today, throw those in the comments. If I don't get to them now, I can always answer them back later. But we can actually walk back over towards our main garden section and take a look at those as we are discussing plants, if you guys have any questions. A little bit more serene over here. Okay. Any questions,
we
guys?
do. We actually
Awesome.
we have a question from Marianne. She says that she has seeds that she wants to plant for butterflies, birds, and other pollinators, and she's asking when she should start planting those seeds.
That's a great question. So it really depends on the type of plant you have, what those seeds are for. I can tell you that we've had some weird spring weather. Last night it was about 40 degrees, but it's going to be about 73 today, and the rest of the week's going to be warm until the end of the week, and then it's going to get chilly again. So the general rule is you want to kind of wait for those last frosts. I don't think we'll have any more of those, but I've been surprised, you know, with April and May before. And it's often safer to start those seeds indoors until they start to sprout and then move them outdoors once there's a little bit more stable conditions. But the best thing to do is actually look up what kind of seeds they are. If you know what they are, you can actually do a quick search, I'm sure, online, and they'll often give you the time frame in which you want to plant them for the best. Sometimes, though, it depends on if they're an annual or a perennial and whether you want to plant them for flowers this year or next year. A lot of the perennials, the stuff that return every year, may not bloom in that first year. So for example, I actually just planted some butterfly weed. To remind you guys what that looks like, that's our beautiful orange friend here that's growing in our tire and our butterfly garden. This actually will take over a year to bloom. So you'll get the sprouts this year, you'll get the plant growing, but you won't get a bloom until the following season. When you have an annual, a plant that is only going to come up and stay for usually once a year, you'll actually get blooms usually that same year. So it's a good question. I don't have a specific answer, but if you look up when the type of plant, you'll probably get a little more information on that.
She also just made a comment that it's surprising the beautiful nature of the flowering portions of some of the plants that you have planted, that you wouldn't really think the flowers would be so beautiful on a quote-unquote more standard looking plant.
Yeah, and that's actually, I really love native plants in particular for that reason. I think there's, plants across the world that might not get as much attention, aren't as showy, but I think especially the foam flower, we can actually take a look. The foam flower is not a brightly colored plant, and it's a very simple flower, but just the way it's clustered and set up around the leaves, I think just creates really cool like depth and texture, and it's just a very unique shape for flowers. And so I think with a lot of our native plants, sometimes you get that less showy but very, very intricate when you look up close, which is why I always encourage people to stop and smell the flowers. If you come out to Elmwood Park Zoo, you are welcome to check out our sensory garden. It is open and available to the public, and of course so is the rest of our zoo right now, so make sure you guys check us all out. We actually have a lot of gardens, and we had a lot of great options over the years to add in more natives, so you'll see a lot more native plants and things like that here at the zoo, because we were trying to create those backyard habitats.
And then Marianne, just want to say thank you. That answered her question perfectly.
Oh, great. No problem.
But I think that is the only question that we have for right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining me today on our garden tour. I know it's a little different than most of our Zoo School episodes, but I really enjoy sharing what we've been able to accomplish here with our different areas and providing habitats for our natural pollinators and insects and other animals, because that is really what we're all about here, is conservation, both locally and across the globe. And it can start locally in your backyard with even just a few little flowers. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy the beautiful weather, and we will see you on Thursday.